As South Africans prepare to go to the polls, the governing African National Congress faces its toughest test yet. The party risks losing its majority in parliament. Where has it failed and what has it accomplished? Has democratic South Africa lost its way? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. South Africa is bracing for a milestone election. The governing ANC has been in power for 30 years, but its dominance over South African politics could be in jeopardy. Millions of voters say they're disillusioned. The unemployment rate is the highest in the world. Violent crime is on the rise. The latest police statistics show a person is killed every 20 minutes. And rolling electricity outages are suffocating businesses, big and small. The ANC is still the most popular party, but its support base is shrinking. So has the one-party majority run its course? Could the election on Wednesday launch a new political landscape with rival parties forming coalitions in order to govern? We'll explore these issues with our guests in a moment, but first this report by Katia Lopez-Hodoyan.
South Africa's governing party is used to winning. But after 30 years, opinion polls suggest the African National Congress could lose its majority in the upcoming elections. Leader Cyril Ramaphosa is hoping voters will give the ANC another 5-year mandate, and he's promising to revitalize the sluggish economy.
We want to build industries. We want to localize so that more and more products are made here in South Africa.
With unemployment steadily increasing and reaching 33% in the first quarter of the year, frustration is growing. A recent survey suggests more than 70% of voters believe it's the most important challenge facing the country.
We want change. We want employment. Our youth of South Africa, we find them in the streets. They got nothing to do.
It's followed by an unreliable electricity supply, which is stifling growth and small businesses.
I'm demoralized. I can't even imagine the future with this type of business because of we do depend on electricity on an everyday basis.
3 decades after Nelson Mandela led the ANC to victory in the country's first democratic elections, many South Africans are questioning whether it's lived up to its promises.
Mandela is gone now. Now it's our time. We must see things differently.
Other parties are capitalizing on voters' discontent. The main opposition, the Democratic Alliance, campaigned under the slogan Rescue SA. An influential political figure, Jacob Zuma, threw his weight behind the newly founded MK party after a fallout with the ANC, which he once led. Opposition parties, which once had limited influence, could now become a force to be reckoned with. Without a majority, the ANC would have to build coalitions with rivals, potentially compromising its policies.
Coalitions in the different metros have also taught us that they are not based on any principle, and if we could have that, the possibilities that we could still be moving towards a lot of instability.
But it's the voters, not leaders, who will ultimately decide if the elections on Wednesday will mark a turning point in South African politics. Katia Lopez-Hodoyan, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Cape Town is Crystal Orderson, veteran journalist and host on the Cape Talk radio station. In Johannesburg, Lesego Makhubela is the spokesperson for the governing ANC in Gauteng province, home to the capital Pretoria, and South Africa's economic hub, Johannesburg. And also in Cape Town is Nkabayomzi Kwankwa. He's an opposition MP with the centre-left party, the United Democratic Movement, and is running for re-election on Wednesday. A very warm welcome to Inside Story to all of you. Mr. Makhubela, I'll start with you in Johannesburg. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world when it comes to wealth distribution. We've already mentioned that it has the highest unemployment rate in the world. That's not to mention the lack of basic services, the rampant crime. Where has the ANC gone wrong?
Oh, thank you very much. The South Africa of today and the South Africa of 30 years ago are different. It's not the same country. 30 years ago, only less than 30% of the population had access to basic services. 30 years ago, only a people of a certain color were able to graduate and get decent jobs. Today, it's a different story. Millions of Africans, Indians, and coloreds who were excluded by a very repressive systems are able to access our schools. The South Africa of today is not the same as the one of 30 years ago, in that even the face of this country has changed. The massive infrastructural investment in terms of public services and other things. So there's been a big changes. Of course, in the past 30 years, there would have been mistakes that we would have committed, and that would have been because of we were new into governance. And we've learned from those mistakes. We are surging ahead, and we are confident that our people are able to tell this particular story of the past 30 years of the rule of the African National Congress. And I agree with you fully that the inequality remains stubborn. And that's why we want to deepen the ANC in its manifesto is now speaking about the industrialization, that we want to deepen industrialization.
Okay.
So that in this industrialization program, we also have black industrialists, so that we are able to ensure that we put black people and Africans in particular into the mainstream of the South African economy.
Of course, because I believe it's something like, 10% of South Africans still control around 70% of the wealth in the country, and that 10% are mostly white. Ms. Orderson, let me bring you in. Mr. Makhubela was making the point that, South Africa is a different country. Of course, the democratic South Africa has only existed for 30 years. Apartheid lasted for a lot longer. But do you think that the gains that the ANC have made in the last 30 years are enough? Could they have done better? What has plagued the ANC?
Elizabeth, there's no dispute that the ANC fundamentally changed South Africa's trajectory from an apartheid unequal society to a society that's fairly equal. But the reality is that has not trickled down to a large majority of people. And here I particularly refer to young people. I had spent this week with different communities, speaking to different young people, asking them how life is, what have they seen changed. And the reality is one, they've never known any other political party or government apart from the African National Congress, but they are unemployed. Now, between the ages of 15 to 34, we're looking at a 60% unemployment rate. So it means that a large majority of millions of Black South African young people are roaming the streets, unable to find a job, and even graduates are unable to find a job. So the young people that I've engaged with are simply saying, they don't see a future because there are no jobs. And this is when crime, drugs, as you refer to, one of the high crime rates we have, those are all consequences for young people that feel there is nothing for them. Now, I'm just not saying this. An Afrobarometer Pan-African survey released earlier this week actually proved that, firstly, that young people are not loyal to any political party. And secondly, they do feel that crime, unemployment, and the electricity crisis have seriously been a challenge for them. And they feel that the country is going in the wrong direction. And so this is the reality on the ground. I don't think anyone disputes that the ANC has fundamentally changed the trajectory of the country. But the South Africa of 2024, for the large majority of young people, Elizabeth, is not a country that they feel very confident or positive about.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You bring up, how unemployment is one of the biggest concerns, and the Afrobarometer poll shows that it's 71% of the people they polled that unemployment is the number one concern. Mr. Kwankwa, let me bring you in, and before we can talk about how all of these issues will play into the election, how do you think that South Africa has got to this point?
Well, thank you very much. It's gotten to this point due to the mismanagement of the economy by the ANC. I want to give you an example. Yes, we're gearing up for the most contentious elections in 3 decades. As already indicated, the problem that you see on the ground is that, especially among youth, there's a lot of disillusionment. The other issue is that the challenge has always been how the ANC has mismanaged the economy over the past 10, 15 years. For example, one could cite figures about the level of economic growth, the level of corruption. I mean, if you talk about state capture alone, President Ramaphosa himself said that about 500 billion rands was stolen from the country during the state capture period. You were to consider one of the issues. We are talking about levels of inequality, which have deepened. One of the problems is that there is no match. There's a mismatch between the amount of money at times we borrow and we spend and the social impact on the ground. Because we borrowed in 5 years, 2017 to 2022, we borrowed 1.8 trillion South African rands from 2.5. But even after we borrowed those figures and borrowed money, we are still not able to make a dent in the unemployment rate, reduce poverty, reduce issues of inequality, which we are grappling with on a daily basis. So it's the mismanagement of the South African economy.
Okay, mismanagement. And Mr. Makhubela, how much of that mismanagement does come down to corruption in the ANC? Mr. Kwankwa is talking about state capture, which is, of course, what happened in South Africa between politicians and business leaders who worked together to really alter laws, alter state institutions at a fundamental level to enrich themselves. He mentioned the last 15 years. That is when Jacob Zuma came to power. He was forced out by the ANC 10 years later because he was found to have enabled corruption. Has the ANC dealt with the wrongdoers? Yes, they forced Jacob Zuma out, but has Cyril Ramaphosa adequately addressed corruption in the ANC?
Your principal question, which gave rise to those unfortunate views from my colleague in the UDM, stems from the unemployment rate in this country, which is a problem in the world. You would know that we were hardest hit by the COVID pandemic when President Ramaphosa was elected in 2017.
I understand, Mr. Makhubela, but South Africa does have the highest unemployment rate at 30%.
Can I make my point?
But you're not answering the question, which is, has Cyril Ramaphosa addressed corruption?
That is because how we look at unemployment in South Africa is that we even start from the ages of 15, just like one of the experts had said. And that's why the ANC has unleashed a massive program to ensure that we reskill our people because of the advent of the 4th Industrial Revolution. Let me now return to my point. My point is that you would know that the COVID pandemic would have hit us very hard. And while we were grappling with the COVID pandemic, we were hit with the situation in Ukraine, the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has cost us a lot of problems. And that's why we took a footing there and said that this war must stop. While we are dealing with that, the conflict in the Middle East is not even assisting us. The biggest economies in the world are also struggling with the very same challenges that we are struggling with. And that is because South Africa is not an island. In the matter of corruption, President Ramaphosa was elected by structures of the ANC, given a mandate to ensure that he is able to uproot all the corrupt elements in the African National Congress. And that's why you see former statesmen and former presidents of the ANC, such as President Thabo Mbeki, well respected, who are coming out to campaign for the African National Congress because they believe that the renewal that the ANC spoke about in 2017, that the powerful waves of renewal are now beginning to remove all the chaff that the ANC would have accumulated accumulated throughout the years. All the rotten elements which were within the ANC would have compromised the public purse are being dealt with. They are being subjected to law enforcement agencies, and we are turning the tide against. They were turning the corner on the challenge of corruption.
And we have certainly seen corruption cases, various cases against President Jacob Zuma that hasn't stopped him from trying to re-enter politics. Ms. Orderson, let me bring you in now, because the Constitutional Court has ruled that Jacob Zuma cannot take part in elections, yet his face is next to the logo of the MK party. They're not polling badly. They're polling around 14%. That would make them the third largest party in this election. How big a contender is Jacob Zuma? He can't take part, but are there any doubts that he will be controlling the party from the sidelines?
So, Elizabeth, I spent some time in KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and here in the Western Cape, trying to engage with the MK party structures. In KZN, it's non-negotiable. People that you speak to, they are angry and they refer to the ANC as Ramaphosa's ANC. They also will tell you up front they are unhappy with the way Jacob Zuma has been treated by the ruling party, by the so-called comrades. However, when you ask them, okay, so what about load shedding? What about corruption? What about the fact that the Zondo Commission had shown the extent of Jacob Zuma's corruption? Then they simply say, well, during Zuma's time, there was no power cuts, etc. So I almost feel like the kind of support on the ground, especially in KZN, it is so loyal to an individual, and that is Jacob Zuma. If one looks closely at its policies, and when we engage with voters in Gauteng and in the Western Cape, because in fact here in the Western Cape, there's also a very active MK branch, and they've been campaigning very targeted in townships and in peri-urban rural areas. They've completely not even bothered with the middle class or in certain areas. There, their focus has been on Jacob Zuma needs another, he has unfinished business. He didn't get the opportunity to complete his term. So in my opinion, I think we're going to see a KwaZulu-Natal kind of KZN MK emerging. I don't think that can be said for the rest of the country.
Okay, that's really interesting. So his support base hasn't moved away from him because of all of the corruption cases, but you don't see that support being replicated elsewhere. Mr. Kwankwa, would the ANC, not predicted to win a majority in this election, what are your hopes for the future of South African politics and the role of smaller parties such as yourself?
Firstly, I want to correct some of the excuses which were made by my colleague from the ANC. The 9 wasted years of President Zuma, that phrase came from the ANC itself, and there was no COVID during that period. Secondly, the fact that, for an example, out of the 500 billion rands which was stolen from the fiscus by the ANC during state capture and its comrades, only about 14 billion of that has been recovered so far. And then you tell me you're winning the fight against corruption. The other issue is that the Corruption Perceptions Index, we've received the worst score ever, number 83 out of 180 countries. And you're saying we're winning, and that is a report for 2023. So you mustn't come and mislead the public here. The other issue here is that you've seen that there's a number of political parties, including sister opposition parties, that have started working closely together in trying to unseat the ANC, because our intention is clear. We have to redefine and to reconfigure the political landscape in South Africa for the benefit of South Africans. And one of the issues which was mentioned in the inset when you were background to the story is one of making sure that we sort out and try to develop a model that would work for South Africans when it comes to how we're going to work in a coalition arrangement after elections. Because one thing is clear, the ANC is not going to be in power after May 29.
Mr. Makhubela, that certainly, as we've been reporting, polls show that the ANC cannot win a majority. So are you thinking about coalition partners?
The ANC will win decisively, overwhelmingly. It will win KwaZulu-Natal, it will win Gauteng, the DA will lose the Western Cape, And I predict that the UDM might not even feature in parliament in the next parliament. And that's what we are getting on the ground. We're very much confident. Our people have seen how coalitions have destroyed the local sphere of government. They've seen what is happening in the city of Tshwane, a city that is broken to the ground, where no services are delivered to the people, where nothing is working, which is the capital city of our country. They've seen how Johannesburg, since the advent of coalitions in 2016, has regressed to the worst state that it finds itself. They've seen where one of the most viable municipalities after the advent of coalitions in Ekurhuleni, in just a few years, has been rent to the ground. So our people are allergic to a cocktail of political parties trying to move a country forward. Our people are very clear, and that's what they are telling us. They told us that yesterday in the Siyancoba rally. They reminded us that the ANC is the only party that can be able to take this country forward, and that the ANC has to continue with its renewal and leading this country. By Friday next week, this coming week, the ANC will be pronounced the winner of these elections.
Okay, so you're confident despite the polls.
Yeah, those polls
Orderson,
that you are using.
Let me bring Mr. Makhubela, let me bring Ms. Orderson in, because we don't have very long left in the program. And I would like to bring her in on a point that you yourself are making. South Africa has seen what coalitions look like at the municipal level, at the city level. They have worked on the municipal level, not so much. Mr. Makhubela is right. On the city level, what do those coalitions, do they give us an idea of how they could work?
I think to some extent it does, but also not, because in Cape Town we had a coalition many years ago of smaller parties, and the coalition worked very successfully. I think in particular because of Johannesburg and Tshwane, I mean, we're looking, Johannesburg is Africa's largest industrialized city. I mean, its GDP is bigger than most smaller African countries. So it does take a bit more, I think, in terms of governance of coalition. But I do think Mr. Makhubela has to be confident that the ANC will win. And I don't think anybody disputes that the ANC will be the largest party come May 29th. I think the question is, what is going to be the percentage that the ANC will win? And I think the reality is different polls, and I know that political parties are often very dismissive of these election polls, and we've had quite a few. I don't think one can dismiss it, especially a very authoritative Ipsos poll that actually showed a very kind of bleak picture. But I do think that there's a margin of error because we're not looking at turnout. We've got 27.7 million registered voters. I think turnout is going to be very large. Weather plays a big part. The weather is perfect for Wednesday. And I think ultimately if the ANC can bring their supporters out, opposition parties like the Democratic Alliance, MK, EFF, if they bring their supporters out, I think it's a real race. And I do think no one can actually say what is going to be the final election outcome come Friday. Okay.
Mr. Kwankwa, Mr. Makhubela is saying that, you know, he doesn't see you being in the next, winning enough votes to be part of the next parliament. Would you work with the ANC? They are predicted to be the majority, even if it's a reduced and outright majority. And it is very difficult, isn't it, for people, even if they're not happy with the ANC, it is more than a political party. It is a former liberation movement that won people's freedom. And that is what all the opposition parties in South Africa are up against.
Well, we must distinguish between the ANC of Nelson Mandela that represented and rather that freed South Africa, and the current ANC, which is running South Africa to the ground. The other issue that Mr. Makhubela, which I'm picking up from his submission, is that he's not guided by facts. He's not scientific in his approach. He's ignoring pollsters, he's ignoring reports that come out about corruption in the country, mismanagement. If I can cite economic indicators, I think I'd actually do that until cows come home, which point precisely to the mismanagement of the South African economy and the fact that they have no intention to fight corruption. In fact, they want to fuel it because it helps them with their lifestyles. The issue here as the UDM is that we've made it clear, even as we're talking about coalitions, pre-election coalition discussions, that we're open to working with South African political parties that would actually embrace our program and make sure that we have developed a program of action that is going to uplift our people and make sure that we make a difference in their material conditions in the country. So we're guided by programs and policies of the UDM rather than by saying we don't like so and so and so.
Okay, we don't have very long left in the program, just a couple of minutes, and I'd like to ask a quick last question to Mr. Makhubela and Ms. Orderson. Mr. Makhubela, why does the ANC deserve another chance?
Well, we have to continue with the building of the National Democratic Society, which was envisioned by President Mandela. And a correction there, the ANC of Nelson Mandela had President Cyril Ramaphosa as its Secretary General. The ANC is rooted to the ideals of Mandela. Therefore, we have to continue with that project of ensuring that we want to build a non-sexist, a non-racist, a prosperous and a free democratic South Africa. We still have to ensure that there are many corners of this country, which you pointed out earlier in your questioning, on fighting inequality, on ensuring that we combat corruption, on ensuring that all our people, especially Africans in particular and blacks in general, are able to come into the mainstream of the economy of the country, which has been a very strong struggle because you have a minority in this country that continues to protect white privilege. And that's why you even have professors, when they refer to Cape Town, they refer to affluent parts of the city of Cape Town. They are not speaking about where coloureds live. They are not speaking about where blacks live in Langa, Nyangalanga. And the DA government has not worked for those people. It has worked for whites, of course, in the white affluent suburbs.
Okay, Mr. Makhubela, I'm going to bring Ms. Orderson in here.
That represents all the people.
Ms. Orderson, do you think that the ANC can do that? Can it redeem itself? And could this election see, the dawn of a new era in South African politics?
Elizabeth, we've had 0.6 growth rate. We've got a population of over 60 million. I think that certainly how can an economy grow when you have less than 1%? And I think that's at the heart for many people. People go to bed hungry. Our crime rate is high, ultimately because the socio-economic conditions, as Mr. Makhubela pointed out, has materially not changed. The ANC has had 30 years, and I do think they face an uphill battle because South Africans are very opinionated. I think the 27.7 million people will ultimately show the way, and we will have to wait and see until Thursday. I think it's been a very competitive election campaign for all the parties. In fact, we've got 57 on the voting ballot on Wednesday when I go vote. So I think ultimately the close to 30 million South Africans will decide whether or not the ANC deserve another chance. And I think ultimately it will also be an internal kind of reflection for the ANC. If they fall below 50%, what's next for Africa's oldest liberation movement?
A very big question. Thank you to all of our guests. That is Crystal Orderson in Cape Town, Lesego Makhubela in Johannesburg, and Nkabayomzi Kwankwa also in Cape Town. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.